Welcome to Leadershipisation, all things leadership. My name is Beth Bergen, and I'm a global leadership and communication coach. My focus in all the coaching and all the workshops that I deliver is about helping you to build your leadership intelligence. And that's one of the things that we address all the time here in Leadershipisation. I'm here most Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, which is 2 p.m. in New South Wales or Victoria right now because they have daylight saving. Habits. Look, a lot of the focus around habits is on bad habits, and it's all about stopping them or replacing them with better ones. Because habits and developing or changing or building habits that are going to stick is such an important tool in your leadership intelligence. We're going to have two parts to this. We'll start today. We'll start looking at what are habits and how do we understand them so that we can begin that process of changing them. And we'll start looking at what is one way, what is one strategy that we can use to build better habits. So, oh, by the way, better habits that stick. So, where do we start? Where we start is by thinking about what is a habit, how do they get formed, and who decides? Is it a good habit or is it a bad habit? Look, a habit is an action or a behavior that's triggered automatically in response to some kind of contextual cue that happens. Cue, C-U-E, not a big capital Q for question. And every single habit that we have is the result of a neurological pattern that is actually called a habit loop. So every habit has a habit loop that goes with it. Now, some habits may have similar aspects of their habit loop, but generally they're quite different. And it's really useful if we can work out what aspects there are in the habit loop, what it is that's triggering us. So there are three keys there, and I want to run through those to begin with. The first one is cue. The second one is routine rather, and the third one is reward. Now, some people will add craving in between cue and routine. So we won't look at that so much this week, but we may touch on that next week. So what is it? Let's start with the cue, because this is what actually starts the behavior. It signals the brain to initiate the behavior. So that cue is like a trigger for you. That cue is what sets things going. And there are two types of cues. The first one is external. So this is external from you. And it might be something like the time of day, it might be music, it might be a smell or a sound, it could be a voice, it could be a person who triggers you. It's external from you. The other sort of cue or trigger that you can get is internal. And this is all about emotions. It's all about emotions and feelings. It could be boredom, it could be stress, it could be excitement, it could be a range of different things. And so when we experience that cue, excuse me, when we experience that cue, when we experience that trigger, our behavior happens virtually automatically in response to it. That's our cue. We'll come back to that a bit more later. Let's look now at routine, which is the second key to the habit loop. Routine. Routine might be physical. It might be, and this is the behavior, it might be that you move. It might be that you automatically grab a snack. It might be that you smile. It might be that you make an actual action. It might be that you clean your teeth without even thinking about it. It might be that you start the car. If it's mental, then it could be something like procrastination or motivation. The behavior is going to come as a direct result of the cue, and it forms the second part of your habit loop. The third part of the habit loop is your reward. Now, this is quite critical, which we'll discover when we're looking to see how we can change these habits. The reward is that sense of satisfaction that we get because sometimes it's satisfaction, it can just as easily be a sense of relief. Oh, yeah, I did really well there. Oh, thank goodness. Because you've achieved something or you've been able to miss something. And what happens with that reward is that it actually reinforces the behavior. It reinforces the behavior. Now, over time, our brain associates that cue or that trigger with the routine and with the reward. So when I hear that voice, this is the behavior and this is the reward that I get. And that then becomes an ingrained habit. And when it's an ingrained habit, this is when it occurs virtually subconsciously. We don't have to think about it. It's like it's just an automatic behavior. Now, when we want to learn something new, this is when it gets really interesting. In order for us to learn something new, we have to have a really strong focus. We have to pay attention to whatever it is. And we have to repeat that over and over until it becomes an automatic action. And once it's an automatic action, it shifts from the part of our brain that deals with conscious thoughts over to the part of our brain that deals with subconscious thoughts. And that's when it becomes a habit. This shift from one part of the brain to the other is what makes habits so powerful. It becomes second nature. We do it with little thought at all. It conserves our energy. We're just doing these things automatically. And because it's shifted to that part of our brain where it's subconscious, that's why it's so difficult to change habits. Now, what's really awesome is that our brain has plasticity. And because it has plasticity, what that means is that we can actually change it. We can actually change it. We've got to work at it because we've got to move it from one part to the other. And how we do that is we start by identifying the cue that triggers the habit that you'd like to change. Now, the cue, as I said before, could be the time of day, it could be the person, could be the emotional state, could be the environment. What's really crucial is that you sit and observe yourself for long enough to understand that this is the cue and this is what is the key to me breaking the habit. Then what you need to do is you need to look at the routine. What is the behavior that comes from this? What's the behavior that comes from that cue? Because this is what you want to change. And so you need to be identifying, okay, this cue was creating that behavior. I'd like to change that. What's the behavior that I want to replace here? Now, just going to take a little step to the side for a minute. Earlier, I said to you, who says that something's a good behavior or a bad behavior? Ultimately, lots of people might be offering suggestions to you, by the way, but ultimately you decide based on your own values, your own choices about your lifestyle. You decide whether it's a good habit or a bad habit. Is it something that serves you or is it something that doesn't serve you? And so once you've determined what that behavior or that routine is, what you can do then is change it to something that suits you. I can remember being a smoker for many years. And if any of you have ever been a smoker, you virtually have to teach yourself how to smoke. And it's actually quite hard. because it's awful. I started on menthol cigarettes and nearly made myself sick because I was babysitting, but I wanted to look like Linda Haywood, who did the best smoke rings and the best Chinese drawback that I'd ever seen. And so I was determined, I'm going to learn how to smoke so I can do those two things, because boy, did they look cool to me. And so what I did was I despised what I was doing. My body did not like it, but it very quickly became a habit. And then without thinking, you're reaching for a packet. Without thinking, you're lighting a smoke. What I discovered when I decided I was going to give up, and it was actually quite simple for me to give up, because I had discovered what the cue was. And the cue was holding the cigarette in my fingers. And what I found was that when I held that cigarette there, it sent this little signal up my arm to my brain. And so when I gave up, for a period of time, I would ask friends who were smokers, could I hold on to their cigarette? I didn't want to smoke it, but I needed to break that dependence on the signal going up my arm. Now I probably play with pens way too much, but I gave up smoking, many years ago, and have never needed to have another cigarette since. So this new behavior, this new routine has to have some kind of reward. Your brain, it's got to be something that your brain finds satisfying. So it might be a relaxation, a sense of achievement, or a positive emotion. It has to have that reward. Um, Once you decide what your new routine or your new behavior is going to be, you need to keep doing it. You need to keep doing it in response to that cue so that the habit loop gets rewritten. Be mindful the whole way through that there will be triggers and behaviors. There'll be all sorts of things that are there to disrupt that habit loop, that automatic loop. But the more you're able to manage those triggers or those behaviors that are going to disrupt the automatic loop, the more control you're going to get over your own actions. The best thing about changing a habit is that you can take it gradually. And the more gradually you take it, generally, the longer lasting it is. And it's also important to be kind to yourself and not decide you're going to change 7 habits all at the same time. Because what will happen is all of those cues and those habit loops will get all muddled up and they'll start to trigger each other. And you potentially won't have the kind of success that you're looking for. One habit at a time is likely to give you greater success, and do it gradually. For example, morning walk. If you're not a walker, start with 10 or 15 minutes the next day. Do 5 minutes more the next day. Do 5 minutes more. Go out until you're just building that up to more and more and more. Now, notice I said go out every day if you possibly can. Consistency is key. And every single time you do something, it strengthens that neural pathway. And that means that you're getting closer and closer to that automatic habit loop that we were talking about. Now, you might need to do a number of things to change your behavior. You might need to modify your environment. You might need to hang around with different people. For example, if you're surrounded by people who are eating junk food, if you're surrounded by people who spend all day binging on TV, if you're surrounded by people who drink a lot or take drugs or have a lifestyle that you've decided isn't what you want, you're going to have to take responsibility for consciously shaping those surroundings, because that's going to make it easier for you to change and to maintain your new habits. All of those triggers won't be there for you. Now, the awesome thing about habits, of course, is that they help us to function effectively. And they actually conserve energy because we don't have to think about it. We just do these things automatically. However, if they don't serve us, that's why we need to change them. So let's have a look at that cue reward kind of connection. Time is actually a great cue. Have a think about what you do in the morning. You wake up, you might go to the toilet, you have a shower, you clean your teeth, you get dressed, you get yourself organized, might have a cup of tea and something for breakfast. You do that automatically probably. You start your car automatically. Often you drive automatically. Start noticing yourself. Repeat, notice how often you repeat those certain things kind of mindlessly at different points of the day. Do you go and get a snack or a coffee at exactly the same time? Do you have a smoking break at the same time? And are they actually good or bad habits for you? If it's a bad habit, if in your mind you think it's a bad habit, identify how you're feeling at the particular time. Are you feeling lonely? Do you want some connection with people? Are you trying to break up the monotony of your day? Now, it's important here that you dig deep, because when you understand why and what the cue is for you automatically at that time doing that particular thing, it's easier to figure out a new habit to fill that void. Otherwise, the other habit will continue. Now, important thing about bad habits, they're not eliminated completely, they're replaced. We don't eliminate them, we replace them. So, time-based cues. We also use this to stick to our routine. On Tuesday and Thursday, I go to my stretching class. I leave home at a particular time. I leave home at 6:15. I get there just before 6:30. On Friday, I send an email out to my list, my database. On Tuesday, I do this. So time and date can really drive a pattern, and they form a habit. And the habit is actually about sticking to your schedule, not necessarily about doing the particular thing. So what you can see is that if you can understand the motivation and the trigger around those time-based cues, if you can understand what it is that you're feeling around that time-based cue, we can start to begin to get some changes happening for you. Okay, that's what we've got for this week. Next week, we're going to continue with building habits that stick, and what we'll look at is some other habit cues and what you can do to identify those and to use them, just the same way as we've looked at time, use them to have new habits stick. What's important, and if you're looking for some homework out of this, start to notice what are those time-based cues and think about how you're feeling at that particular time. Think about what the emotion is. It's not about feeling hungry. It's what is the emotion that is here. Am I a bit bored? Do I want to break up the monotony? Because then what you can do is come up with a different behavior that gives you a reward that serves you rather than a reward that doesn't serve you. So thank you for being here. If you've got any questions or comments, pop them in the chat on the platform that you're watching this on. Excuse me. And I'll get back to you. I'm happy to answer those as quickly as I can. If you're watching the replay, please put #replay. We'll reach out to you and see what comments you have and what feedback you have. Thank you so much. I'll see you next week when we're looking at building habits that stick. Part 2. See you then. Bye now.